Chapter 7, On the Cool Edge of Night. On the cool edge of night. They returned to camp with the others, though their stay was brief, Fernil relating their encounter at the temple as Avalur tended Frith's face, the old elf insisting it be healed, his prayers fading the welts to 3 pink lines that would likely be gone completely by the morning. As for their next step, it seemed their group would not be parting ways after all. Since the threat to Suldanissellar was still unresolved while this band's motives were unknown, Fernil had decided to investigate further. They left for the marching mountains at dawn. But that was many hours away yet, and in the meantime, Fritha, it seemed, had plans, the girl re-shouldering her pack and explaining to the surrounding elves that she intended to hike out to the nearest village for additional supplies, Solafane not waiting for the invitation to join her as he stooped for his own bag. The sun was sinking in the west by the time they had left the cover of the trees, the brown foothills golden in the dying light. Fritha seemed to know the way, the girl leading them up a narrow path through the dry undergrowth, the trees kept clear by the flocks of sheep that roamed there, the creatures looking burdened by their heavy fleeces in that heat and watching them pass with unfathomable black eyes, their ruminating jaws never stopping once. It was a half-hour later when they reached the village, finally cresting the slope they had been a quarter-hour climbing to find it nestled in the dip just beneath them, the mountains proper towering behind it. Solafane paused on the dusty path, eyeing the huddle of whitewashed buildings with a wary frown, Fritha glancing back to him with a concerned look.
Solafane. Perhaps, I should await you here.
Don't be daft, she laughed, continuing her course and clearly expecting him to follow.
I somehow don't think even the keenest of drow raids make it all the way out here. The only way they'll know your people is by reputation, and it is one which only you can change.
The village itself was 2 long rows of squat, white buildings, each curving round to leave an open circle at the far end. It was a small place of barely a score of houses, the people that packed it now likely drawn from holdings in the surrounding hills. This gathering seemingly as much about trade as celebration, with stalls set up outside some of the dwellings, chairs and benches spilling out before the tavern. A group of people were gathered in the open circle at the opposite end, some singing while others played instruments in accompaniment, the men and older women dressed in dark, serviceable homespun, while the younger girls were in white, though perhaps that was just for the day. Solafane could not imagine anything staying white for long in that dusty place. Females of every age wearing a bright shawl about their shoulders, thick black edges bordering the geometric patterns of color woven within. No one noticed their arrival at first, the celebration continuing unabated, though one by one, people would spot the newcomers, heads bowed with their neighbors as they whispered, and Solafane could feel the eyes following them as they passed, the drow fighting to keep his hand from his sword hilt. It did not take long for one with some influence to decide to force an introduction, a tall, lithe-looking man, even for his advanced years, leaving his friends to make his way slowly towards them with a measured pace that reminded Solafane of Valigar, the whole village wrapped as the scene played out. He had reached them now, the man's face tanned and craggy behind the tangled grey beard, a contrast to the black hair that fell to his collar.
Fair Greengrass, travelers, I am Durheed, headsman of this village. May I ask why ye visit Redm's store?
Fritha bared her neck in a deep nod of respect.
Fair Greengrass to you, sir, I am Fritha and this is my good friend, Solafane. We're with a band of elves who are camped down on the edge of the Wealdeth. We're here investigating a disturbance in the nearby temple ruins, though are running a little short on supplies. We had hoped to replenish them here, and perhaps join your celebrations. We are not here to cause trouble.
She added gravely, gaze flicking to the narrow-eyed men that watched them from outside the tavern.
Just to welcome the spring as do all in Faerun.
Durheed looked down on them for a long moment, his dark eyes stern beneath the bushy brows, and it seemed more for their spectators' benefit as he extended a thick arm and solemnly shook her hand.
Well, we would be glad to share our bounty, as Our Lady Chantia shares her own with the world. Welcome, friends.
The wealth of that village seemed built upon the sheep they grazed, Frithha browsing the few stalls, admiring the brightly woven rugs and painted earthenware, Solafane at her arm and still feeling more guard than companion as he watched people watch them. But if Frithha felt any discomfort, she was not showing it, completing her shopping with a detailed and rather expensive map of that land, a heavy, smoked cheese of ewe's milk for the elves and one of the colorful woolen shawls for herself in blues and greens, the girl looping it about her neck as they came to a halt outside the tavern. A counter had been set outside, perhaps to allow the innkeep to enjoy the bustle, as well. A line of men stood at it and laughing with the server. Frithha led the way through the scattering of chairs and tables that had been brought out into the sunshine, the stout, ruddy barman hailing them as they arrived.
"A fair green grass to ye, strangers,"
he greeted, eyes lingering for a moment on Solafane, before he was all smiles once more.
"I am the innkeep of Redm's store, Alban de Souza, and I will get ye whatever drink my small tavern can supply, but first a toast of D's with us."
"D's?" repeated Frithha, giving voice to Solafane's question as the man retrieved a bottle of clear liquid from under the counter and set out 3 small cups.
"Aye, miss, 'tis our local speciality, made from the sour apples that grow around these parts."
Solafane had seen a few of those scrubby, gnarled trees on their walk up there. It looked as though even the sheep refused to eat them. He eyed the cup of clear liquid now in his hand, a glance to Frithha confirming it, and he felt as though his throat was on fire. No poison could taste so vile, Solafane coughing as the harsh liquid burned to his stomach. The men about them were laughing, though not unkindly.
"That'll put hairs on your chest, that will, lad. I'd best avoid it then,
joked Frithha, the men still laughing as she sank her shot and slammed the cup rim down on the counter with a triumphant snap.
"Oh ho,"
laughed the innkeep,
"downed like a connoisseur."
Frithha licked her lips with a satisfied grin.
"Of course, I grew up in a monastery, you know."
More laughter, the innkeep drawing them 2 tankards of the local ale, and they moved away apace to make room for the next lot of patrons. The pair leant back against the tavern wall and watching the world go by. Solafane let his eyes drift across the street to where the headsman, Durheed, was back with his own group, laughing kindly as he slapped his comrade's shoulder, and paying no attention to him, the rest of the village following his example. It seemed in the face of such celebrations, their fame was to be brief. Durheed glanced up to catch him watching and offered him a somber nod, Solafane returning it, his eyes moving back to the girl at his side.
"You read people well, Frithha. I doubt this village would have welcomed even Fernil and the elves, and yet here I am."
Frithha merely shrugged, drawing a mouthful of ale.
"Actually, I think it was the ash sprig in your hat that did it." "You dismiss your skills too readily."
"Not at all," the girl cried, gesturing to the people that milled all about them.
"Look around you, Solafane, that hat that set you out in Sultanaseller, marks you as a brother in this village of shepherds. Durheed has likely heard tales of your people, then he finally meets a drow and he is wearing the same hat that his son puts on every morning."
She glanced to him, her eyes grave above the smile.
"Such small things make people think and question, and that is only ever a good thing."
Solafane nodded slowly, eyes drifting back to the celebrations around them.
"They will have gatherings like this all across Faerun today." "Yes, though different places have different customs. In the northern cities, nobles wear flowers that have been specially grown in hothouses or throw them on the ground as offerings to encourage the spring. A scandalous waste of flowers if you ask me, but each to their own. The day is important, as well, to farmers, druids and others who make their lives in the land. I wonder what Jahara is doing for the day. I hope she found some wild place where she could make her prayers." They could be still at Diarnas Keep or even in Athkatla visiting Valigar. I bet Imoen will drag her out for a proper celebration this evening. And Simon will be knighted by now, Eric and Anomen carrying him about Athkatla as he celebrates his success.
She smiled absently, for a moment far away from there as she watched the friends she had vowed to leave behind.
So, how long will it be before we reach the Marching Mountains?
He asked gently. Fritha frowned, doing a quick calculation in her head.
About a fortnight, depending on where Fernil wants us to head. We will basically have to walk the entire length of Tethur. I don't even know what he hopes to find. The mountain range is huge, unless they really do have giants in their company it may be impossible. The local people will surely have an idea,
he said practically.
Oh, I don't doubt it, it is just if Fernil will deign to ask them.
Solafane shared in her wry smile.
I am surprised he is even pursuing this, he can surely see there is no threat to Sultanaseller.
Fritha snorted, laughing into her cup as she offered,
perhaps Elsyme just told him to take me far away, you watch, our next clue will lead us down to Kalimport. I am glad you can take amusement in all this, you seemed more disturbed at the ruins earlier. Did I? She sighed. It was just a bit strange to be there, to know so many others of the children were both born and had died in such a place. You seemed merciful enough to their murderer,
he commented dryly, the cold hatred stirring again within him as his eye caught on the 3 pink scratches her cheek still bore.
The old priestess.
Fritha confirmed, something of the wistful creeping in as she admitted,
I suppose I felt sorry for her. Her whole life in that temple awaiting Baal's return. To lose your god, even one like Baal, it must be such an awful thing. What lengths would you go to restore them?
Solafane said nothing, too consumed by the idea of it. He had come to Alastri's worship late in his years, but even then, he could not now imagine the yawning hole it would leave within if he were ever to lose her light.
You worship no deity of your own.
Fritha shrugged.
I was brought up a devotee of Ogma the All-Knowing, but that pretty much ended the day Gorion said I was old enough to get myself out of bed and down to morning prayers. Now I pray here and there when the situation warrants, but I have not devoted myself to one god as some others do, it never felt right. You came to age within a library, did you not?
She nodded, taking another long draught of ale.
Yes, but I was not born there. My mother was a lady at the elven court of Ashabenford, far to the north of here. Would you wish to return there one day?
She glanced to him, seemingly surprised.
You know, I have never even considered that. Perhaps I should mention it to Fernil, it's even further from Sultanaseller.
She laughed again, finishing her ale and flapping her hand to encourage him at the same. Solafane gulped back the tangy liquid, feeling a touch light-headed, he had never been one for drinking. The group at the bar had moved to take a table, and Albin was already beckoning them back across with a smile as he poured another 3 cups of the foul D's.
So what brings ya two here to Redmstor then? We're part of an elven band,
gasped Fritha, setting her empty cup back on the counter. Solafane was pretending he had not noticed his.
We're here investigating the temple ruins, we heard there had been a disturbance there recently. Oh a band of men were seen traveling in the western hills, though they brought no trouble here, thanks be. In fact, we have had much to be grateful for of late. The weather has been mild and more lambs than ever survived, praise be to Chantia. We dedicated the first lamb of the season in her name at high sun, it will be kept back from the flocks and raised here in the village for its first year to ensure its survival. Young Yuan, the carpenter's son, won the honor of its ownership during the wrestling earlier today. A shame ya missed that.
He added with a nod to Solafane,
I imagine it'd have done well. Doesn't look so much of a challenge now, does he?
Albin laughed, pointing to a young man, thick-set and tall, though he hardly looked it then, slumped over the table as he was, blonde head lolling as his bleary eyes found them, the youths either side of him looking little better.
Albin, more ale here!
Shouted the dark-haired youth next to him.
I think you've all had enough for the time being, young Kiev. I asked for ale, not a scolding,
the lad shouted back. Albin ignored him, pointedly refilling their tankards, Fritha knocking back the stray cup of teas still waiting on the counter.
So, do you get many outsiders around these parts? Well, the elves of the Wieldeth sometime pass by on their own business, though they never stay. The dwarves are a mite friendlier though. The Gord-Riven are the clan, miss, though their halls are a fair distance from here.
Solafane let the man's voice and his tales of the dwarves wash over him, feeling unusually contented and quite ignored as he watched the village about them, the groups of men and women gathered in talk and laughter about the few stalls, some with a sprig of sage or leaves pinned to shawl or jerkin. A knot of young girls had stopped just before the tavern, their talk quick and conspiratorial as they swung the short sticks they held, the lengths decorated with ribbons of plaited grasses. Solafane scanned the street, quickly finding the target of their chatter in a similarly tight group of young boys further down the street, the girls finally selecting one of their company via much hissing and shoving, the chosen maid sneaking forward with stick outstretched and lightly tapping the nearest boy to much squealing and laughter.
What are they doing? What?
Asked Albin, following his eye to finally understand his question. Oh, 'tis a tradition of our village. The girls make the sticks at dawn ready for the ceremonies later, and the boys they tag during the day are marked as their sweethearts, but 'tis all in fun. That was perhaps debatable. Solafane had never seen so many knots of wary young boys, there was safety in numbers, after all.
Course, 'tis a more serious business for the older ones,
Albin continued wisely, pointing out a group of slender young women, all looking very fair dressed in white with their colored shawls and hair loose, their chatter barely indistinguishable from their giggling as they eyed a group of young men who were leaning very casually against the building opposite.
Many a betrothal will be announced in the following 10 days.
Albin laughed, sending Fritha a theatrical wink, as in nature,
'tis the ladies that do the picking.
Solafane nodded, he knew all about that.
Here, Albin, we want our ale,
shouted Kiev again, others of his group voicing their agreements, and Albin sighed deeply, at last relenting.
Gods, give me patience, excuse me there, friends.
Fritha turned her smile to him as the innkeep bustled off, the light behind him now, bathing her face in a pale gold light and setting her hair ablaze.
Are you all right, Solafane, here, I mean? You don't feel uncomfortable or anything? No, I am fine, Fritha.
He sighed, taking a long draught of ale and letting his eyes take in the warmth of the scenes all about them, peaceful and yet so full of life, the air rippling with laughter both nearby and distant.
It is not quite like anything I have seen before, not even in Suldanessellar. Do you miss the Elven city? Because, Elsheim promised you could. I do not miss Suldanessellar,
he cut in firmly.
The city was beautiful, but it was sheltered and their ties to my people were too close. I was tolerated, even welcomed by some, but it never could have become my home. Is that why you came with me?
He faltered, her query throwing him. It had just seemed so obvious at the time, he had not even questioned it himself. If she was leaving, it had felt only right he would go with her. But Fritha was still waiting for her answer. Solafane whirled at the peal of shrill laughter, the light tap to his leg barely registering as he came upon a dark-haired girl of little more than 5 summers, the stick trembling in her hand as she greeted his surprise with a cheeky belly laugh, her friends peering around the corner of the tavern as they giggled merrily.
"Ya up to mischief there, young Estrin?"
laughed Albin, back behind the counter and grinning widely.
"I fancy this one might be taken."
A bell was clanging back in the square, a cry going up from the girls as they straightened their shawls and hurried off towards it, Estrin watching them go. Albin smiled, untying the apron from his barrel-like waist and laying it over the bar, as about them, people rose as well, only the drunken youths remaining in their seats, though perhaps that was more from necessity than choice by now.
"The sun is setting and it is time, are ye two coming to watch it?" "It's the planting dance, isn't it?"
confirmed Fritha. Albin nodded.
"Aye, that it is. I know we aren't much for farming up here, but everyone relies on the land all the same. Ye seem knowledgeable enough of it though. Ye fancy joining them, miss? Oh, unless ye are married, of course,"
he added with a quick glance to the still mute Solafane. Fritha laughed gently at his undoubtedly unnerved expression.
"No, I am not wed." "Perhaps, then, ye could pair up with young Estrin here. She hasn't yet been able to dance, for, as ye likely know, it requires an even number of girls and we have had an odd number here in the village in the last couple of years. I know Elder Yima keeps a spare stick in case one is lost in the day."
Fritha sent a smile to the girl still next to them.
"Would you like that, Estrin?"
The girl bobbed a curtsy, suddenly shy without her friends.
"If it please ye, mm. Come on, then."
And Fritha hurried after her, Solafane and Albin following at a steadier pace. The other girls were already paired and assembled in a ring within the circle, onlookers gathering at the edge, and the two men joined them as the two girls pushed through to find a place in the ring, the sun behind them, just a sliver of darkest orange cresting the mountainside. The music began, a lone violin whining its tremulous cry over the silent village, the girls raising their sticks as one, though not a step was taken until the drum's beat joined the air. They moved in harmony, a slow graceful dance of sweeps and dips, sometimes turning to their partner, stick meeting stick across the pair, the sound crack putting Solafane in mind of the occasional clashes between the deep Rothe males. They danced until the last inch of sun was gone, the circle plunged into sudden blue twilight. The beat stopped, the girls followed, the violin fading with the light. No one applauded, the air quiet and solemn as the girls returned to their families, Estrin skipping back to parents who were beaming in pride, Fritha smiling as she found him in the crowds.
"You came to watch, then?"
"Indeed," he nodded, emboldened by Ale to add,
"You once said I should see you dance. I am glad I was afforded the opportunity."
Fritha just laughed, the musicians striking up a more sprightly tune for the couples that were taking to the circle. They did not join them though, Solafane knew none of the dance's end, whether it was his presence that caused it or not, no one came to ask for Fritha's hand either, and they returned the tavern. Albin was back there and ready to greet them, the man only pouring 2 cups of D's this time, a nod to the ale carafe next to them indicating for Solafane to help himself.
"And here's to ye, miss,"
the stout man laughed, a few of the men next to them raising their cups, too.
Young Estrin was glowing.
Fritha smiled.
"She danced it very well, did she not?" "All the girls did." "Yourself included,"
added Albin with a kindly smile, nodding to the bottle as he moved off to a quick clear of the surrounding tables.
"Just help yourself to the D's there, miss." "That's a very safe sort of generosity,"
muttered Fritha, downing the cup he had poured her with a cough and reaching instantly for her ale, her smile broadening as she found him next to her.
"Well, Solafane, are you longing for your bed yet?" "Not quite yet,"
he smiled, and in that moment of such unfounded jubilance, he wondered if he ever would be. He followed her gaze back to the square and its chaos of dancers, and he rather wished he could have pleased her similarly, though talk of it would have to suffice.
How did you know that dance, the planting dance? It is a well-known one.
She turned back to him, taking a moment to work out his question.
Oh, I learned all the dances I could find in my youth, usually religious ones, some tribal, others that were linked to certain customs, whatever someone had taken the time to write out the steps for, really. Chantia's worship is widespread and her rites many, planting, reaping, threshing all given form and dance. But you must know a few dances yourself.
She added blithely,
does not Illustre have many of her own? You will have to show me them, oh, if it is allowed.
Cellophane smiled, sudden and full, at this mention of his goddess.
That she does, and I would be very pleased to have you see them.
Her moon would be rising soon, the mountains' sharp black spines against the dark blue sky. Half the chairs had been taken to the edge of the circle and he and Fritha joined a table of older men, whose dancing days were well behind them, one of them producing a tile game that Fritha seemed to know well enough, the girl joining them in a hand and the customary cup of teas as they talked and drank, Albin busy clearing the tables about them, constantly harangued by his 3 resident drunks.
Albin! Be silent, Ayane, I will not serve yet another drop.
Cellophane turned back to his own table, the 4 men surrounding them all dark-cloaked and long-bearded as though it were a uniform.
That is a fair shawl ye have there, miss,
offered Toluid to the girl next to him. Fritha beamed.
Yes, I thought so. You have skilled weavers here, and dyers too, the colors are wonderfully bright.
Another of the men, Leodar, laughed kindly as he placed his tile.
Ah, 'tis Holland's wife who should hear that praise, she is mistress of the art here in Redm's store.
The crooked-nosed Holland was nodding proudly.
My Petrid is the one, and she has the stained hands to prove it, though these hills yield little bounty when it comes to the dyer's needs. She and the other women must harvest most of their plants from the edge of the Wealdeth, not that ye elves care for it.
He added rather sharply to them. A chorus of disapproval.
Holland! It ain't their fault.
But Holland would not heed them.
'Tis true, and I won't say otherwise. Last autumn, one caught her, had the cheek to tell her it was his forest. His name wasn't Fernil, was it?
Muttered Fritha. Cellophane just suppressed a snort, though Holland did not hear her.
As though anyone can claim ownership of a forest. Kings and lords do often enough,
offered Anak practically. Holland looked grim.
Aye, and we know how well that can end.
Another uproar. Cellophane was beginning to suspect the old man liked the trouble of it.
Holland! By the gods, man, don't talk of that here. Ah, it's your move, Uid,
he snapped over them, grumbling away to himself as the game continued, though he said no more.
Ah, that is better,
sighed Albin, sinking into the empty chair, his chores finally finished, this respite merely another chance for the youths to press their case, the dark-haired Kiev swaying as he made to his feet.
Here, Albin, I'm fine now, see, now, give us another round.
The innkeep ignored them.
Ah, Javit, is it?
He continued, nodding to the game in progress.
Ye will have to deal me into the next hand. I am surprised to see ye here though, miss, ye two not taking to the floor then.
Fritha shook her head.
No, we don't know any of the local dances. Albin, we only want another carafe. Be silent, Kiev.
Across the table, Uid smiled.
Mayhaps, ya can show us some of the elven dances then.
Frithla glanced to him, Solafane feeling that same amusement he could see sparkling in her eyes. He certainly had not taken well to them at Elisim's party, the movements feeling forced and full of artifice after the more instinctive dances of his home. At the table behind them, Yuan sneered.
Yeah, girl, show us one of your mincing elven dances.
Holland slammed a fist into the table with a rattle of tiles.
Bite your tongue, Yuan Ganstave, I am sick of listening to ya. Ah, shut your face, Holland. Ya like the elves well enough when
'tis ya complaining about em.
Ain.
And then a voice above the commotion, deep and full of weight.
Is there some trouble over here?
The headsman, Durheed, was stood on the edge of the tables and glaring quite pointedly at the three youths. The once tanned Kiev was pale.
What? No. Larif.
The headsman interrupted in a loud bark that carried far across the street, a broad, blond man glancing back at this summons to make his way over to them. Yuan looked like he was about to be sick.
Oh gods, Kiev, he's called me Day.
Larif was already frowning, perhaps such trouble was not so unusual.
What's going on here then? It weren't nothing, Day,
assured Yuan quickly. Durheed's stern gaze came to rest on Frithla. Her voice sounded high and clear after the gruff shouting of the men.
It was just a misunderstanding, I think, no harm was done. Well then,
the headsman nodded, turning back to the three youths.
Perhaps ya lads ought to think about having a sit somewhere quiet and taking a little something other than ale.
Mutters of sulky agreement, Durheed and Larif following the youths out and their group turned as one back to the game, Frithla sending him a quick smile as the turn came to her once more.
So, do you all live here in the village? I do,
answered Leodar cheerfully.
So does Holland and, of course, Albin. The rest of us come from local holdings or Tor's Peak, a small village 2 leagues to the east of here. And all are shepherds.
Anuk nodded.
For the soil is too thin to grow a decent crop. But some favor goats over sheep, especially over my way where the ground is stonier. Goats,
muttered Holland.
Miserable ill-tempered beasts.
Maybe so, if ye are treating em
as ye do your sheep, Holland.
Lots of loud laughter followed this. Solafane did not quite understand the joke, though it was likely rather coarse from the way Frithla was giggling, face flushed above her hand.
If ye please, miss.
Piped up a high voice behind them. Solafane, turning in his chair to find the young Estrin, stood nervously swinging her baton under their assembled gaze. Frithla smiled.
Yes, Estrin. Well, my brother sent me to ask ye if ye would like to dance.
She pointed out to the street, the tall, rather rangy-looking lad who was standing there quickly smoothing his hair. Solafane frowned.
He cannot come to ask himself.
The table erupted with laughter.
Why, that would not do,
cried Albin, as I told ye.
'Tis the ladies that do the picking on green grass.
This was clearly news to Frithla, as well, and Solafane realized suddenly it was likely the reason she had yet been asked to dance. The girl though merely smiled.
Oh, well, I should be happy to then.
Estrin clapped her hands delighted.
I'll go tell him ye are coming to ask,
she cried, her smile broader as she added cheekily,
ye can borrow my stick if ye like.
A smile and the slightest squeeze of his arm under the table and Frithla was gone, Solafane feeling the glare of the 5 men now solely upon him. Holland placed a tile down with a pointed snap.
So, ye are a drow, then?
Cellophane saw little point in denying it.
I am. Ye were born up here?
Asked Leodar curiously. It would have been easy to lie to them, perhaps too easy.
No. But ye live with the elves now then,
confirmed Anak. Cellophane shrugged, eyes flicking over to the circle, though they found no blot of copper to catch upon.
In a way, I follow the lady, not they.
A round of gruff muttering, Holland nodding wisely.
Oh ho, like that is it?
Cellophane frowned, he did not like his tone.
Like what? Pay him no mind, friend,
interrupted Albin quickly. Holland, though, would not be silenced.
Do not pretend ye have not heard the tales, Albin. We may never have met any of your kind before, but we know of your ways.
Cellophane waited for it, the anger tightening in his stomach. All evening they had been looking at him, pretending to laugh and smile when all the while had waited the accusations of murder and torture and
how ye drow are trained for prowess in the carnal acts.
He could have almost laughed. The surrounding men were watching him keenly, Cellophane taking a drink to offer.
We are expected to please our females.
Holland snorted.
Oh, I'd heard ye menfolk are all kept well under the thumb. Ah, pay no mind to him, lad,
laughed Leodar.
'Tis the same up here, only the ladies are kind enough to let us believe otherwise.
Holland puffed himself up stubbornly.
My Petrid knows well her place. Aye, Holland, course she does,
nodded Uid, his eye catching on something behind them.
Oh, good Petrid, Holland was just speaking of ye.
Holland whipped about so fast, he jarred his neck.
Wah, ye buggers! Quit your laughing, wretches! It gets better, Holland,
smiled Anak, laying down his last tile. Everyone groaned that time, the surrounding cups of teas disappearing, Albin laughing as he poured the next round.
Come on, deal another game!
Cried Leodar, his grin broadening as it fell upon Cellophane.
Ye know how to play Javet, lad? Well, here sit by me and watch my hand and we'll have ye learning in no time.
It was a few games and many forfeits of Ds later, the liquid certainly not so harsh as it had once seemed, and Cellophane felt he was just about getting the hang of it when Frithha returned, flushed pink and smiling, what looked to be half the village with her.
Frithha, you are back.
She nodded brightly.
Yes, the musicians are taking a break.
Which meant the end of Albin's, the stout man already back behind his bar to serve the wave of patrons. Their game disbanded as the remaining 4 men greeted their wives and children. A quick jump and Frithha was perched on the table before him.
So, you having a nice time over here? Aye, they are teaching me Javet. Aye.
She giggled, examining the almost empty bottle of Ds.
And not doing so well at the game either by the look of it. How much of this have you had? Not as much.
Frithha laughed delightedly and gently tapped the brim of his hat.
As much, is it? Poor drunk Cellophane, I will be carrying you back to camp.
He smiled at her teasing.
I can walk yet. Well, then perhaps you can come with me when the bands strike up again, treat the good people to some of our mincing elven dances.
Cellophane just laughed. The hall was bright with lanterns and lamps, the golden glow leaving no corner for shadow and bringing out the colors in the banners to house and laugh under both, a cool breeze from the doors onto the veranda making the light flicker and dance. A gnomon settled beside a tall brass plant pot and nursed his ale, watching the colorful chaos of people that thronged about the room, all full of talk and laughter, and even the servants that swept back and forth with trays of brimming cups seemed as pleased to celebrate their house's success. Across the room, Simon's father, a tall, bearded man whose hair was now more grey than blonde, was talking with Eric and Irlena, the two daughters of that household, stern Olivia and flighty Isabel giggling with Elsenda. Diesfeld was standing close by and laughing similarly with the glowing Simon. Brianna, looking a little lost in it all, stood a pace between them and Simon's mother, the jolly, round-faced woman fussing over her newest grandchild, the swarthy beauty Fariha at her side.
"Ah, a gnomon, isn't it?"
came a voice behind him, and a gnomon turned to greet a blond man of the same chiseled features of his father, a dark-haired boy of little more than 3 winters dozing on his shoulder. He proffered a friendly hand for him to shake.
"Gerard, Simon's elder brother, I believe we met briefly at the midsummer celebrations last year." "I recall it, Gerard. You are well, I trust." "Very well, especially since now young Adris has a new little sister with whom to play."
The man smiled, glancing across to Fariha, mother and child now reunited, husband and wife exchanging such a look of honest love. A gnomon almost lowered his gaze, discomfited to witness such open intimacy.
"You must be very proud of your brother,"
he offered, Gerard starting back to him.
"Indeed we are, and,"
he added gravely,
"I am sure we have you in part to thank, you and Eric both. You have been a sobering influence upon our Simon as he became older."
A look to the man himself, dark-haired Olivia under his arm as he swung her about, the girl frowning as their mother fretted over them both.
"I don't know that we did that much." "Well,"
Gerard sighed,
"I had best get this young man off to bed. Perhaps you can persuade my brother to the same."
He laughed, clearly deeming this an impossibility, and a gnomon's gaze shifted back to his younger brother as Gerard moved off. Simon has released his sister by now, she and Isabel talking with Satur, Brianna in their company, though only barely, and a gnomon watched the dark-haired woman edging slowly back to be lost in the surrounding press. A moment later and she was at the doors and slipping out on the veranda. The gardens were in darkness, the empty terrace lit only by the glow of the noisy hall they had left, these panes of light reaching only halfway across the grey stone terrace, the long marble benches and thick columned railing behind deep and inky shadow. Brianna was stood at the balustrade and gazing out across the darkened gardens, wearing the same green velvet gown she always wore, and it struck him suddenly then, that she likely did not have any other.
"My lady!" "What?"
she snapped, whirling back, her dismay evident as she found him.
"Oh, a gnomon, I am sorry, you startled me." "Your pardon, my lady."
They seemed to turn as one, looking back into the golden hall they had left.
"Simon is celebrating his success in earnest,"
a gnomon offered to the silence between them. Brianna sighed.
"Sir Simon blessed in more than his new title. My father died when I was very young, mother lived until I was 9. I am sorry." "How?" "They were killed by orcs,"
she cut in briskly. A gnomon frowned.
"On different occasions."
She nodded, taking a sip of wine and sinking onto the stone bench behind them.
"Well, yes, though I suppose my mother's end came in a more roundabout manner. A plague had swept the town. She was ill, but there was an attack on the caravan that was carrying the medical supplies, many died that winter. I was sent to the abbey with the other children who had lost their families. We were all to be sent to an orphanage in the lowlands come the spring, but I asked to stay there.
She shivered slightly, a gnomon removing his jacket, the eye of Helm embroidered within winking in the lamplight as he passed it to her. Brianna nodded her thanks, drawing it about her as she continued.
I liked my life at the Abbey, but even so, the desire for vengeance burned within my heart. When I was not at prayers or chores, I trained with local militia, going with them on patrols of the mountains as I grew older and later leading men of my own. I wanted to purge the land of the evil that had robbed me of my parents.
She glanced to him, eyes grave.
I was angry for a very long time, but the wisdom of the Tormite sisters showed me that such ire serves no one. I learned that to serve my God was all I could do, and that is the path I walk now. So how did you come to learn of the order? I did not, well, not directly anyway. Last winter a paladin of Torm came to our abbey. We are a little way from the town, and though the sisters are skilled enough in arms themselves, an able sword is always welcome. Morgad was his name, a good, stern man who shared my devotion to the true God. We would lead patrols into the mountains, protecting the town from the orcs and trolls that would raid the lowlands. And in the quieter moments he would ask of my plans, tell me that there were greater evils in the world awaiting my blade. I did not know it then, but he had already written a letter to the order asking if they would take me. They clearly answered in the positive for, before he left, he told me of the order and asked if I would wish to join. I did, and he presented me with a letter from the prelate there and then. But what of you, a gnomon?
She continued,
have you a family as lively as Simon's?
A gnomon dipped his face, almost embarrassed he did not have something more cheerful to offer her.
Ah, no, my lady. My mother died when I was 19, my father and sister just last year. Oh, I am sorry. Sickness took them. No, they were murdered. Murdered?
She repeated, clearly surprised.
You speak of it so calmly. You took vengeance against the villain.
A gnomon paused, for a moment, back there in that silenced hall, Serk sprawled and panting at his feet, Fritha's face glazed with relieved tears.
No, I was very angry, but, thanks be, I was talked back from such evil. The murderer was brought justice in the end. Revenge is not the way of the order.
Brianna nodded absently.
No, it is not. Well.
She sighed, slipping his coat from her shoulders to hand it back to him with a wan smile.
We will be setting out early on the morrow, I should likely retire. Thank you, a gnomon. No, please,
he refused, gesturing for her to keep the coat as he finished his ale. She was right, and he was hardly in the mood for a celebration now anyway.
I will walk back with you, if I may.
Her smile broadened to something more genuine and she nodded once, taking the arm he proffered as they both rose to leave through the gardens, the rest of the gathering continuing undisturbed behind them. Solafane skidded on the narrow trail, his eyes deemed better for the task of leading them back to the camp through the dark foothills. He was more drunk than he had ever been in his life, such lapses in control deemed too much of a risk to both body and reputation in his former home. He was not sure he completely liked it either, the sensation of euphoria now tempered with an underlying worry he had exposed them to some unseen danger since they had left the village, though it was clearly not a concern Fritha shared, the girl but a pace behind him, the surrounding hills ringing with her song.
Fare thee well cold winter, and fare thee well cold frost. Nothing have I gained, but my own true love I've lost.
The drow felt himself smile, eyes drawn to the dark sky that hung above them, acres upon acres of breath-stealing stars coruscating in the void. He had never before been able to appreciate the vastness of it from underneath the Wieldeth's canopy, the whole sky scattered with diamonds and dusted with silver, a dark cloak of tributes before a queen's feet, the moon's crescent, the benevolent smile of his goddess shining down upon them.
And all around my hat I will wear the green willow. And all around my hat for a 12-month and a day. And if anyone should ask me the reason why I'm wearing it, it's all for my true love, who's far, far away. Looks like someone else is far away, too.
He glanced to the girl behind him, Fritha's teeth a smiling crescent that rivaled even the moon's glow.
I was just looking at the stars. Evidently,
she giggled, sighing wistfully as they resumed their course.
I always feel better at night, it is easier to be yourself in the darkness.
They were closing upon the forest's edge now, and a silence fell between them as they crossed that narrow plain and slipped into the Wildeth once more, the pair unwilling to disturb those already asleep. Tandeth was on watch with the young Bryn, the wood elf raising a hand in friendly salute as they arrived.
Ah, it is you both,
he greeted, the youth at his side watching them curiously as he saluted, too, and Solafane straightened, trying not to look as unsteady as he felt.
The captain had thought you had perhaps left on your own path when you did not return.
Fritha snorted.
Well, he's going to be gutted tomorrow, then. Good night, you two.
They entered their tent to the murmurs of good night, the air within warm and close from a day set up, Fritha collapsing gratefully onto her blankets with a dramatic sigh.
Ah, bed's sweet embrace, how I have longed for it.
They both turned to change with their usual unflustered haste, the pair laid under their blankets soon after, the silence letting him muse upon the day's events. Whether Fritha's plan or not, that evening had shown him that the tense tolerance of Suldaneseller was not the best he could expect in that world of light. He glanced to the girl laid next to him, hair unbraided and spilling out across the pillow, the ash sprig he had gifted her placed reverently between them. Solafane closed his eyes, the tent swaying about him as though he were floating in some close soup of blankets, his thoughts a torrid jumble in his hot, spinning head.
I am glad that I met you, Fritha. There are many with whom I could travel the surface, but I feel there are few who would afford me the acceptance I find in your company.
He could hear her frown.
Is it so? I think you are viewing the situation too cynically. The acceptance they showed in me in Redmstor today was out of respect for you. Yes,
she conceded reluctantly,
in the beginning, but you had it in your own right by the end. To be accepted, Solafane, you have to act like you should be, like you expect nothing else, don't help people make an outsider of you. Kossuth's heart, it's warm.
She sighed, sitting suddenly to heave off her linen slip, and Solafane caught a glimpse of her naked back, a smooth, flawless white in the darkness, before she was laid back down once more, naked under the blankets. Solafane lay still, suddenly very aware of his own body and the heat of hers just a foot away as it burned off the liberal amounts of dees she had consumed. He had shared congress with countless females in Ustnatha, some because he was ordered, some because it was advantageous, and a few for more heartfelt reasons, but Fritha was the first woman he had actually slept the night next to, an act once steeped in warm fraternity to him, now tinged with something else. He swallowed dryly, trying not to recall it, the body pressed beneath his, her breath at his ear. She could have been another person, lost in the memories of all the others, but she was not.
Fritha, why did you lie with me in Ustnatha? Wah!
She murmured, sounding half asleep and clearly trying to understand where such had come from, no more explanation on his part prompting her answer. She sighed slightly.
Well, I suppose because I wanted to prove to myself that things like that didn't matter, and, at the time, it did not. You regret it now? No,
she cried, rolling to face him in her earnestness, blankets clamped to her chest.
Don't think that. It was just something that happened. I am not sorry for it, but that isn't who I am now. No.
He considered slowly, as she lay back once more. That proud, fearless woman had been an act, though the qualities which had inspired it still remained, it was merely the presentation which differed now.
I prefer you this way.
A ripple of laughter warmed the darkness.
What, half drunk and out of tune?
Cellophane smiled, at ease once more as he relaxed back into the cool bedding.
Yes, just like that.
They reached the forests around Suldanesseller at noon of the second day of Myrtle, a light rain rattling through the canopy above them, the damp air awaking the scent of the woods in an earthy richness, their panted breath misting as Imoen drove them onward with an urgency that had been escalating since they broke camp that morning.
Look, there,
the girl cried finally, almost slipping on some knot of wet roots in her haste,
through the trees.
And there it was, that tower of a trunk, though things were not as they had left them.
Finally! I can't.
Imoen stopped, noticing it, too.
The gates are shut. Why are the gates shut? Imoen!
Shouted Jahara, but it was too late, the girl already crashing through the undergrowth, churning up a mess of the slowly composting leaf mulch in her wake. By the time they joined her at the gates, Imoen was already scowling, one of the two guards on the other side of those rock-glided bars attempting to soothe her.
I understand your frustrations and I am truly sorry, my lady, but we have our orders. Queen Elsyme has instructed the gates closed to all those who do not make a home here. We did.
The girl interrupted hotly.
Until this trouble to the south has passed. And what of our companions?
Asked Jahara, stern but calm as she addressed the elf.
Are we at least allowed to speak with them?
A glance between the two men, the second guard stepping closer to offer.
If you speak of the Lady Fritha, I was informed she left many days ago. What do you mean she left?
Snapped Imoen.
She and the drow just departed, they told none where they were headed. Oh, yeah? Well, just you let me ask Elsyme the same. I am sorry, my lady, but I cannot open the gates. I can try to get a message to Her Majesty once our shift ends, if you wish. Don't bother,
Imoen snorted, turning abruptly to stalk away from them, a few paces from the gates and still marching as she finally vented her temper.
I knew it. I just knew something was wrong.
Valigar frowned, unable to tell whether she was angry her fears were confirmed, or pleased she had been right all along, the ranger sending a contemplative glance back to the gates.
Perhaps Fritha planned this from the beginning. Did you suspect something before you left for the wedding?
He thought it a rather neat way to explain away her apparent clairvoyance. Imoen, however, looked appalled.
No, I didn't. And Fritha wouldn't have done that either. So, young Fritha has gone and left no means for us to follow,
rumbled Minsk, averting any further chances for argument.
Who says this is not like her? At least, it did not used to be. Yes, well it sounds like just the sort of thing she'd indulge in at the moment,
said Jahara tiredly. Imoen was shaking her head.
I still won't believe she planned this from the start. She said we'd talk when we came back, about leaving the city. She wouldn't have lied, not like that.
Jahara sighed, shaking the rain from her hair and pulling her hood back up.
Well, whenever the decision was made, Fritha either left of her own volition or she was encouraged,
the druid finished, unusually tactful. Imoen was quick to seize upon this alternative.
Yeah. I bet it was that Elsyme, she just waited until we were all away from the city, then she could kick those two out without any fuss. Bloody Elsyme and her bloody El. Ho there!
And their company turned at the greeting to see three youths emerging from the forests to the east of them, bows strung at their backs, the tallest of them holding a hand aloft in greeting.
"Who are they?"
muttered Imoen, not waiting for an answer as she changed direction to close the distance between them. The others left no choice but to follow.
"Ho yourself, mate! What do you want with us?"
The blond lad nodded once, gesturing to his two companions as he explained,
"We have heard the city gates are closed to you now and we are sorry for it." "You are her friends, are you not?"
asked the dark-haired boy at his side.
"Friends of the ball?" "Horii!"
The other two hissed crossly, the so far silent third of their group offering more properly,
"I am Respan and this is Tyagul and Hori and Dirth. You are friends of the Lady Fritha, yes?" "That we are,"
confirmed Jahara.
"Is it true she and Solafane have left Sultanaseller?"
The tall Tyagul nodded once and gravely.
"It is certainly the word about the city. I could not say when, but they were still about a 10 day ago, for we saw them out in the forests." "Do you have any idea where they could have gone?"
asked Valigar.
"We are sorry,"
sighed Respan with a shake of his head.
"We never spoke with the lady, merely saw her about the forests, usually in the west where the stones rise up to make the Spirit Grove." "Spirit Grove?"
pressed Imoen. The dark-haired Horian Dirth was nodding earnestly.
"Yes, it is an old place, older even than the temple ruins that mark the descent. They say long ago it was the site of sacrifices, when this land was wild and our people wilder."
The two blondes were snickering.
"Horii, you cannot believe those tales." "It is true. My mother says the stones are the mouths of the fates. It's just an old ritual site." "No, it isn't. My mother." "Your mother?" "This grove,"
interrupted Jahara firmly,
"can you mark it on our map?"
They could and did, the boys giving them jumbled directions that were not helped by their bickering over the route, though the gist made it through. Follow the brook to the forked tree, then head northwest until you reach a glade of ash trees and you will be close by it. They were deep in the forest now, the air charged and close as the rain grew heavier. And through the trees, Valigar could see them at last, the mossy grey stones looking very much a part of the forest after so long, and the ranger could feel his skin bristling as they approached. There was power here. When the young hunters had first mentioned the place, his mind had conjured up an image of the traditional henge, a glade bordered by squat stone monoliths. But, in reality, the thing was much more than that, a large raised platform of stone, about the same size and shape of a decent room at an inn, and bordered on three sides by a wall of carved panels that stood a head higher than Minsk. A curious pattern of grooves had been engraved into the stone floor, tracks that stemmed from each panel curving and weaving out to all meet in a shallow central well.
"This is the Spirit Grove,"
confirmed Minsk, gazing about the dais with a frown.
"Who wonders then, where are the spirits? In Rashomon, such places would be alive with Tel Thors." "Perhaps they are sleeping,"
offered Imoen,
"or have gone away now no one worships here anymore."
Valigar left them to their chatter, stepping closer to the stone wall, the surface carved with the worn masks of distinctly elven faces, some fair and knowing, others twisted in fell anger, their blank eyes staring straight through him.
"So, you have come as it was predicted,"
came a voice, coolly commanding, Valigar whipping back to see a tall slender woman step from the panels behind them, her robes as black as her short, rain-sleeked bob, lips scarlet under her heavily painted eyes.
"I knew the fate stones would not."
She stopped, a sudden frown knitting her brow.
"Where is Fritha?" "That's just what we all want to know."
Red lips curled back in a sneer.
"Ah, Imoen, another of the cattle, well, I suppose you will be a worthy second." "Hey, I am second to no one." You were here looking for Fritha,
confirmed Jahara.
What did you want with her?
The woman smiled generously.
Oh, no more than I want from your Imoen here, and you, too, I suppose, since you're about. Great things are afoot and your contribution comes now. I am Ilisira the Quick, fools, and I have been given the pleasure of ending your miserable lives.
A flash of light, and suddenly there was not one woman but 6, the 2 groups scattering as above that first rumble of thunder roared across the canopy. Solafane stumbled, he could barely see his feet in the glare, let alone where he was placing them, Fritha whipping back just in time to catch his arm as the rocks gave way underfoot, the stones dislodging to shower down the steep and thankfully empty path behind him.
Damn this heat, and damn this light!
He cursed loudly, his voice echoing slightly in that narrow ravine and making his head ache all the worse. Last night was the first and absolute last time he got drunk. They had been traveling through the star spires since the dawn, the low mountains apparently home to tribes of dwarves, orcs, and even werewolves, though they had seen no sign of anyone as they had made their way. Solafane checked his footing and pulling his hat an inch lower. All that time in the Wealdith, he had not before realized how bright the sun was without the cover of the trees. The steep pass they were currently walking was unfortunately east-facing, and the cause of more than one stumble so far, though Fritha expressed no impatience with this, the girl seemingly happy to let the others pull away from them, at least for a few yards, as they lingered at the back. The girl was smiling now, giving his arm a friendly squeeze as she released him and turned to continue their path, the elves they followed already nearing the summit.
Come now, the sun will peak soon and then it will be behind us. By which time, we will have likely changed direction,
Solafane muttered, sending a glare that could have rivaled that fiery eye at the captain's retreating back. Fritha laughed gently. Where, pray, was her hangover?
Ah, Solafane, ever the optimist. The sun will peak and all will be well. Come, let's sing a song to pass the time. I do not know any surfacer songs,
he admitted sourly. But Fritha's cheer was not so easily deterred.
All right, well, I learned a few drow ones in Ustnatha. What about that one about the orgy?
Solafane could feel an unwilling smile pulling at his lips.
That does not particularly narrow my potential choices. Besides, would you not feel discomfort singing about such?
Now how would the surfacers describe it?
Carnal acts. As far as I know, it is not usually spoken of outside of the body insinuations of which your Imoen is so fond.
Fritha laughed brightly.
Oh, no, there are loads of songs and poems about it up here, too, only they try to disguise it with allusions to other things, like swords, and sheaths and flowers and, bees and things. They describe the act of congress via insects.
He confirmed, he could not think of any creatures less appropriate, or pleasing. Fritha nodded soberly.
Yes, quite. I would much rather they came out and said it, frank and fresh as the drow do. All that effort to be all poetical about the thing, just makes it seem as though they are ashamed to speak of it clearly, as though there is something inherently wrong and tawdry in the act.
Fritha shook her head, looking rather disappointed in the world.
Such beliefs about something which is not only natural, but necessary, it cannot do anyone any good. You too.
Barked Cephas, the man stood on the crest above them, bright against the clear blue sky.
Hurry yourselves. The captain would move out.
Solafane frowned, Fritha catching his hand to pull him after her with a laugh as she quickened her pace.
Come on, catch up! Catch up!
Panting with laughter and the climb both they crested the hill, Solafane pausing to catch his breath and there he stopped. For a moment not even bothering to breathe as his gaze swept across the ripping green plains of Tethur, a silver web of rivers flowing westward to the azure sea and shimmering in the heat. To the south, the marching mountains loomed and smoked, while behind them, the forest they had spent the last 7 days crossing stretched to the horizon, dark clouds hanging over the northern canopy. He had long thought it, even when all he had known were those nights spent sat under the sighing branches of Suldanesseller, but it was only then when he was confronted with the overwhelming beauty of the surface. Solafane turned back to see the same wild joy he felt reflected in Frith's smile, the girl beaming when suddenly it faded, her shoulders beginning to slump under the weight on her pack as her eyes rolled back.
Fritha!
The gravel path scraped his knees as he lunged forward to catch her collapse, the peaks about them ringing with shouts as the elves halted their companions and hurried back up the path to investigate. Solafane ignored it all, his eyes fixed unblinking upon her, the girl laying as dead in his arms. Valigar gazed down at her, the others about him doing the same, their group ringed about the twitching Ilisira watching as she breathed her last.
Ilisira the quick,
muttered Imoen, seemingly angered by the woman's death wish.
Ilisira the terminally stupid, more like 4 against 1, as if you do.
Her black robes hid the growing stain as scarlet bloomed from the wound in her chest, her blood slowly seeping across the rain-pelted stones to be channeled into the grooves, a swirling pattern of red that seemed to reach each panel in unisons, and slowly the stones awoke, their voices as one as they began their elven song. Imoen was casting about her, frantic for answers.
What are?
Hush! Hissed Jahara, an ear tilted to the droning chant. The last sound faded on the air, leaving only the soft patter of the rain once more, Imoen waiting a beat before she pressed.
Well, what do they say?
Jahara shook her head.
Very little of it made sense. It spoke of wars and bloodshed in a city, the city of 100 spires.
Valigar frowned.
That is the elven name for Saradush,
breathed Imoen, whipping suddenly to the woman at her side.
Do you think Fritha was told the same?
Jahara shrugged.
This Ilisira certainly seemed to expect her here, perhaps she was as we and arrived too late to catch her. What do we think?
Asked Valigar.
There is trouble to the south,
rumbled Minsk gravely. Imoen nodded, her jaw set.
That seals it, then. Fritha can't keep away from the stuff.
Fritha cast about her, the dull weight in her stomach only growing heavier as she gazed across that blasted, desolate plain of grey checkered tiles.
Hello!
She called into the void, her voice stolen by the howling winds before it could travel any distance.
Oh, hells! Not quite, sister.
She whipped back and he was there, stood behind her as he had been all those months ago, white-haired and somehow smaller without his armor, though the grey eyes were still unchanged, burning with the same determination that would have seen the Sword Coast on its knees.
Saravuk, what's going on?
Chapped lips twisted in a wry smile.
Everything, sister, all I once strived for and drove towards. The time of the old prophecies has come and you, sister, it seems, have a unique advantage. It may not have seemed so at the time, but having your soul stolen was something of a blessing, it allowed the ball essence to emerge fully, at least for a short while. Your soul is returned now, but the essence had its moment. It is a separate entity within you, and its knowledge of this saga likely surpasses even my own. But how?
Fritha questioned, not liking to think of some separate consciousness within her, not unless it was willing to chat, anyway. Saravuk shrugged evenly.
It is a part of our father, why should it not? And so it brings you here.
He continued, sweeping a well-muscled arm across the plains about them.
Though you may not realize it yet, great things are happening all across the realms, things that your mortal self would find it hard to comprehend, and so the essence brings you here, while the multiverse settles on its next step. I was walking through the star spires and now I'm here. Do not look so worried, sister,
the warrior chuckled.
This is not as before. This is but a projection of you, not your soul. That is still safe within your body, likely being fussed over by that pet knight of yours.
Frithia shook her head, not bothering to correct him.
But why bring me here?
Saravik shrugged again.
I could not say, perhaps the essence wishes to test you again. Well, it's certainly testing something,
she sighed tersely.
Is that why it summoned you here, to test me?
Saravik looked grave.
I was not summoned here, sister, not this time. When you killed the mage, and this plane closed again, I managed to cling on, holding my soul here until you returned. You still cling to hopes of godhood.
He shook his head, his voice quieter than she was used to hearing it.
No, but while I am here, I am not there. I would help you, Frithia, on your path through the prophecy. I gathered much lore when I lived, I likely know more of the what will come than any other save Alondo himself, but unlike the essence, I will not try to manipulate your path. And why?
She demanded.
Why would you do this when you wanted nothing but my death while you still lived? There is no need for suspicion, sister, my goal is a noble one. I merely hope that when the time comes, I will perhaps have done enough that I will not have to go back there.
He dipped his face, voice dropped to barely a whisper.
I am afraid, sister. I once laughed, godhood or death was my goal and I would have done anything to get it. All those horrors I committed without a thought, the lives I threw away in my pursuit, none of it even touched my heart, and yet all that is nothing compared to what I face there. Perhaps you find more sympathy now it is you on the receiving end,
she offered coldly. Saravik said nothing. The haunted look was back to his eyes, and Frithia turned from him, leaving him to his private horrors as she gazed across that barren wasteland, contemplating her own. End of chapter.